This is Inspired School Marketers Sparkcast, the podcast filled with brilliant ideas and brain food for independent school marketing and communications.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Inspired School Marketers Sparkcast, the podcast that delivers brilliant ideas and brain food for private school marketing and communications worldwide. I'm your host, Rob Norman. Please be sure to visit InspirED at inspiredsm.com for free inspiration, education, and information to make your job easier. Today, I'm talking to Kevin MacNeil from Metric Marketing. Kevin applies his passion for sales, deep understanding of online marketing and audience conversion to help schools deepen their customer relationships and ultimately improve their bottom line. Kevin has over 10 years of experience in advertising and digital marketing. As a graduate of the Asper School of Business with majors in entrepreneurship and marketing, Kevin fundamentally understands the marketing processes that help drive and run any business. Welcome, Kevin.
Thank you for having me, Rob.
Kevin, I want to start out. One of the ways Metric Marketing describes what they do is we mine the data to identify and measure the behaviors that lead to conversations, then set your benchmarks and KPIs accordingly. And I know that you specifically are focused on using data to help schools achieve their marketing, but I also know from the InspirED private school Marcom survey that we do, and incidentally, if anyone wants a copy of the last survey results, they can get it from our website. In that survey, one of the questions we asked the respondents was what strength they have in things like SEO and SEM. And most of the respondents felt that they were not that strong in those areas. In the last survey, only 32% of respondents said that they were very qualified or qualified in SEO, and that figure was 27% for SEM. So the first thing I'd like to talk about is data or data. I'm not sure which you prefer. You're from Canada, so it may be data up there.
I think I'm data. Yeah, I think I'm data.
I'd probably say data. Yeah. Let's talk about what you mean by data. What are the data points that you refer to? How's that data generated and collected? Why are they important? All of those things having to do with data. So let's make sure we get a definition of terms so that people understand what we're talking about.
Sure. Yeah, I guess the starting point is we're talking about Google Analytics as the main tool that we're using to measure our marketing performance. There's a lot of tools out there. Google Analytics has been doing it for a long time. Google's pretty good at it. We often forget that Google makes their living selling advertising. So the tool in which they measure that advertising is an important thing for them. So we're talking about Google Analytics when we talk about the tool that we're measuring with. What types of data are we referring to? We see almost the same thing every time we get into an analytics account for a school. And it's part of the way that at Metric we get to know a school, actually, is we walk schools through their Google Analytics account and try to provide some initial insight there. And what we see.
Let me ask you a question before you go on. What percentage of people at schools would you say feel really confident with the Google Analytics data?
I would say that feel really confident is maybe 20%, but 98% aren't getting good enough data to make decisions with. Like they're not getting good enough data to be confident with it. Got it.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. Keep going with Google Analytics.
Yeah, I loved it. Because that's really the point I was getting at, is that 99% of the time when we get into an analytics account, a school is not measuring the type of outcomes, the type of conversions they're called in analytics, that help them make decisions. So we want to understand the outcomes that are actually getting driven from our marketing efforts. The analogy I use all the time is pick a sport. What kind of sport do you like? You're a football guy?
I like football, sure.
Football.
I actually like football and hockey and golf, but some people don't think golf is a sport. But okay. Let's use football.
Yeah, I love football for it. So the way Google Analytics comes out of the box and what most schools are dealing with in their analytics account, it's like they're playing a football game and they're keeping every stat in the world except the score of the game. And then at the end of the game, you're trying to figure out who won, and it's tough to make decisions. One team saying, well, we rushed for 100 yards, so we won. The other team saying, we forced 3 turnovers, so we won. We've got to be measuring the score. And what that is in analytics is getting the proper outcomes. Why so many schools struggle with this is because of the technologies in the industry. And so it's not a coincidence that so many schools have this issue. When we use School Admin, when we use Finalsite, when we use Blackbaud, RenWeb, Ravina, all these different school softwares or administration softwares, it adds complexity to getting analytics right. You need some technical know-how, and that's where we come in and try to help.
So when you talk about outcomes, I know what generally that would mean. What specifically are you talking about when you refer to outcomes from the data at Google Analytics?
When we're talking about Google Analytics, we're talking about often called like an MQL, a marketing qualified lead. We want to know how many people have filled out that inquiry form, how many people have emailed our admissions director, how many people have filled out an online application. We want to measure the things that if we're creating those outcomes in marketing, we know that we're moving the school forward as far as enrollment goes. And schools have multiple objectives. It's part of getting this right. It's not just enrollment. We want to understand what our current families are doing on a site, what they're doing, responding to in our marketing. We have fundraising goals at many of our schools. So there's different objectives that we get organized in there. But at the root of it, we're talking about admissions-related outcomes. We're talking about the type of goals that if we achieve them, we're going to see positive correlation to enrollment increasing.
Well, that's great because obviously you have to have a goal in order to reach the goal. So I think that's great. So you're looking at different outcomes for different facets of the work you're doing. Give me some examples of how you use that data in the decision making that you and the school together are going to decide, here's how we're going to go forward to change the future outcome.
Yeah, change is a good word there. I often say that we become a change agent for what our schools do in advertising, specifically in digital, because with better data, we can make better decisions, we can do better advertising. The first thing we change actually is I meet so many schools that stopped doing, pick a digital marketing tactic, did Facebook advertising, turned it off, did Google AdWords, turned them off. And it's not because they didn't work, or it's not anybody's fault at the school, it's because the data wasn't good enough to know if it was working or what was working. One of the biggest changes that we make once we start measuring the right outcomes is we can really look at the path that a family takes to apply to a school or to inquire into the admissions department. And one of the biggest things that we're teaching in 2021 is the way that the different channels online work together. The one commonality almost every school we work with has is that the customer journey that a family goes through to actually apply to a school is long and it's well researched. So our advertising has to respect that customer journey. We have to have multiple tactics, multiple channels in place for each stage of the customer journey. So we refer to this customer journey as awareness, building familiarity, moving towards consideration until conversion, and then loyalty at the very end. And we need a plan in place for each step of that journey.
Can you describe when you say path, that what's a typical path for a family? It used to be they call up, ask for a view book, you mail them a view book, they call, take a tour, make an application, boom, there's your funnel. Obviously, that's been turned upside down and sideways in every which way possible by not just the internet, but social media. So describe a typical path nowadays.
I'm looking at one right now. So I'll read out. This is an assisted conversion, or Google Analytics calls it attribution modeling, when we look at how different channels lead to conversion. So this is a family who, in this case, they signed up for an open house. That was the action they took. That's the outcome that we drove.
Was that the first touch or in the process?
That was our first conversion in the process, was them signing up for an open house.
Okay.
So the first touch, great question, in this example I'm looking at was paid search ad. So this family, a member of the family, clicked on a paid search ad, got to the school's website, did not convert, left. They didn't sign up for the open house that day. Within 90 days, they came back to the website through paid search again, left the site. Came back through organic search, left the site. Came to the site directly, probably typed in the school's name and the URL auto-completed in their browser, left the site, went onto Facebook, was probably doing their last bit of homework, right, seeing what was on social media about this school, clicked on a Facebook ad, and that day they converted. Now, Google Analytics out of the box is going to tell you that paid social drove that conversion. And there's going to be somebody trying to make decision on marketing still that says paid social is good because it drove that conversion. But really, when we look at that path, paid search did its job, organic search did its job, and paid social did their job. They just had a different point in the customer journey that they were fulfilling.
Yeah, I don't know what the percentage is nowadays. In fact, I had to try to find that out. But I know the percentage of what they call stealth applicants, people who the first known touch, not through social media, but the first person-to-person touch very often is an applicant or I want to come for a tour. They've already done all their research.
Yes.
And that's just, I mean, it was never the case 15 or 20 years ago. Now it's very, 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 very popular, very common for people to do, like you're saying, so much research. These people that you're talking about researched the school 5 times before they actually reached out.
Yeah, but that was a 5-point conversion path. Yeah.
Right. So you're talking about one of the things I've heard you mention is the right data, getting the right data. What is the right data? What makes it right? And what is wrong data that can be either misleading or just is not the right data to help you accomplish goals?
Yeah, to make decisions the right way. One of the pieces of this puzzle that I talk about all the time is actually teaching is what we really have to do out of the marketing department. The marketing department teaching, whether it's head of school, whether it's admissions, working with marketing, or it's at the board level, the difference in asking about a key performance indicator rather than the thing it's indicating, the outcome. Because the outcomes are what people actually care about. So a great example is you're at a board meeting and somebody's asking you, if traffic is up on your website year over year. The answer to that question is really you don't care about that. You don't care if traffic's up year over year to our website. That is a key performance indicator. If traffic goes up and we get the right behaviors, we can drive more leads into our admissions funnel. What they care about is that outcome. Are we driving more leads? Everything else is just explaining how you got there. So one of the biggest things in looking at the right data is separating out what's a key performance indicator, what's a metric that leads to an outcome, and getting focused on those right outcomes that move the school forward.
Yeah, it's kind of like when I talk to people and they talk about their Facebook page or their Facebook group, they think likes are the same thing as engagement. Likes, personally, I don't care if you like my page or not. What I do care about, especially with alumni pages, is their engagement. I've spoken many times about making sure that if you have a Facebook post or a Twitter post or whatever, that there's an engagement involved in that. And it sounds like that's kind of what you're talking about. To have the outcome, that's fine, but there's all this stuff that leads up to that, which would be different for admissions or different for development of fundraising, different for alumni engagement.
Those are going to be different customer journeys. They're going to have a different path towards conversion, is the technical way to say it. But I always follow a simple rule with this. I say this about digital marketing companies all the time, that they get fired every 2 years, not because they're not good at what they do, but because they're having the wrong conversation. And simple rule for me is if you're arming your head of school with reporting on marketing, or you yourself are reporting on marketing, if you talk about traffic, if you talk about likes, if you're not getting to the outcomes, eventually you're going to get fired. That digital marketing company gets fired every 2 years because they talk about traffic or they talk about engagement without talking about the thing those things are indicating for too long until somebody says, I don't care. Traffic doesn't move the school forward. Engagement alone will not move the school forward. We need to see the end of the road. We've got to see that entire path to conversion.
Well, since we're talking about admissions, let's look at that then. You're talking about KPIs, key performance indicators, producing outcomes. Can you kind of give us an example of a school that you work with where you went and you looked at the work they were doing, their website, the engagement, and then were able to kind of analyze and then help create the preferred outcome for the school? I think that'll help people understand what you're talking about.
Yeah, great question. So I have an example of a school that I love, and I love them not because we came in and had success right away. They were actually really an example of our model at Metric, which is measure, optimize, campaign, repeat. Go back to the data to make decisions. This school is such a terrific example of our system working because year one, we didn't go gangbusters. We saw an increase in leads, we saw an increase in enrollment, but didn't meet some of the targets that we had set. In year two, with a year worth of data to make decisions on, we went nuts and we were up 40, 50, 58%, I think it was at the end of the year. So what we actually discovered with this school, it's an interesting one, that as we were gathering data through the customer journey, again, awareness, familiarity, consideration, conversion, loyalty, their issue was actually at the very front end. They were in a competitive market with high population around them, and they had been eating up a lot of their media budget on high cost per click, high competition terms in AdWords. So the change that we made in year two was actually back away from those awareness type AdWords, use more cost per impression type channels like display advertising to get in front of the same audience, to start that customer journey off at awareness, but getting our media dollars to go a lot farther and generating a lot more awareness. And that campaign was built to stay in front of that audience after that, and it was a big part of our success. So we identified the gap at the front of the customer journey, in this case, changed our tactics, changed the way we were spending, and we're able to increase leads in that way.
I've heard you say also when you're speaking about lower attrition, you talk about the right data to identify gaps. And you just use gaps also. Tell us what you mean by gaps. What are they? Why are they important to identify? Why are they important to bridge?
We're trying to find gaps in multiple funnels for schools. So we've talked about this customer journey to enrollment. You want to find out where you're losing those right fit families if they're not acquiring. We look for gaps using a lot of email automation, using email workflows to find gaps in the funnel between taking that marketing conversion and actually enrollment. So now we're looking at a sales qualified lead rather than a marketing qualified lead. And when it comes to attrition, one of the things that we do to battle attrition is try to find those natural attrition points. A classic example is grade 6s for a K-8 school. We've got to be ready to advertise for grade 6 entry then. And it's a different customer journey than our kindergarten or our young students or our young families are going to go through. It's reactive. It's a reactive type of thing that you're doing there when you're looking into the data and saying, okay, I've got a gap in grade 6, so I'm going to advertise for grade 6 entry. But the truth is, in modern digital advertising, is you have to be very prepared to do that. So when you're building a campaign, there's a real cart and horse situation these days with having different ads. So in this case, for different entry points that we have prepared that we can measure against each other so that we'll see it in the data. So we've got to build all those different ads at the front end of the campaign, be thinking that way, so that we can be reactive when the data hits. We actually have an ad to put in market or to test against something else to try to drive that entry point.
Do you do A/B testing and stuff like that? Test different ads to see which is more, can convince people, can engage people better?
Yeah, certainly. It's A/B testing is best practice. One of the funny things about A/B testing, I think I've said this to you before, Rob, but everybody test everything. Sure, test everything, but what's your budget? Because budgets are a real thing, right? So one of the things that we try to do, especially at schools. So one of the things that we've learned over the years is it is a very rare circumstance that we actually totally rebuild a campaign the year after it's in market. So the way that we get into A/B testing very often is year one, we'll run a campaign, and year two really becomes a testing year. It helps your budget go farther, right? Because you're not rebuilding the campaign, and it lets you build out a secondary ad, a secondary landing page, things that you can actually test and leverage the data from year one of the campaign.
One of the things I heard you talk about investing in the middle of the customer journey.
Yes.
What's the middle, and why is it more important than or maybe it isn't more important than the beginning or the end? What are you focusing on when you're focusing on the middle, and how do you focus on the middle if so much of this engagement is at the will of of who you're engaging?
Yes, middle of the customer journey is so important. Google calls this your in-market segment. So that example I gave earlier, we had a gap at the front at awareness. Okay? That customer journey, awareness, familiarity, consideration, conversion, loyalty. The families that are building familiarity or moving towards conversion, that's the middle of our customer journey. And it is best practice these days, especially for a school, to hammer the middle of the customer journey. These families are closer to conversion than someone's at awareness. So like a non-technical path here. This is a family that touched an ad, awareness, step one. They got to your school's website and they dug in. They were looking at the admissions process. They were looking at tuition. They were looking into financial aid, whatever it may be. And they left. They didn't convert. That's not somebody looking for their friends on Facebook. That's somebody researching schools. We want to advertise to them more than anyone else. So we stay on that family, stay in front of them, use retargeting, use multiple channels for retargeting to stay in front of that audience until we can get them to convert. And be respectful while you're doing it. Common mistake we see made. First ad that a family ever sees for your school, first time they've touched your brand, and you're asking them to apply today. It's like a car salesman reaching for your wallet as soon as you walk onto the lot, right? They need to learn more. Ask them to do the right things. Try to get the right ad in front of the right person at the right time is the philosophy there. And in the middle of the customer journey, if we can be respectful of how families are building familiarity, what questions they have, what are they trying to get answered in their research, if we can get that type of content, if we can get that type of messaging in front of them, we're going to drive more conversions.
So how do you figure out what they're trying to find out, what information they need?
We start with market research and we write out buyer legends and then customer journeys for those different buyer legends. So understanding the audience at the front end and building a campaign is extremely important. You want to write out and you want to be thoughtful about that customer journey that you're trying to fulfill. And then if we build the campaign with those customer journeys in mind, we can start gathering data to know what's working and what's not. And that's how we can start tweaking out different content, different messages, what is being more effective at each stage of that journey.
Yeah, it kind of sounds like personas trying to identify different people, different journeys. And as you say, then you're trying to create engagement and create, whether it be ads or whatever, to reach individuals. So you look at what they're trying to, or I guess you're designing for certain personas, placing those ads and seeing how they work.
Yes, you're bang on. I have a story that I love because it was actually a friend of mine out of school. ran phys ed. He's in administration now, but he ran phys ed. So we were running this campaign, and he was telling me, Kevin, we need to advertise phys ed more. We have a great hockey program, men's and women's. We need to advertise it more often. At the end of the year, at the end of the campaign, I told him analytically, no, we don't. We had different ads for phys ed and for the athletic department, and we had ads that were more science, technology, engineering, math. And those STEM ads totally outperformed everything in athletics. And there was a reason for it too. Like when you started digging in this school, in the city that they were in, it's a really old school, 200 years old. And there's a huge new immigrant population that we knew we had to advertise to. And a lot of those new immigrant families were responding to those ads that were more about the education their child was going to receive than they were, about the hockey team. And it's something that the data showed. We made a lot of tweaks. We built a lot on that data to make that campaign stronger, and it performed extremely well with new immigrant families.
Do you see there a difference in generational parents? So that I'm a boomer, maybe not as I'm probably more technologically adept than a lot of people of my generation, but the next generation, the Gen Xers, are extraordinarily adept, and the millennials after them, they may be a little. They're probably old enough to be having kids. How do you adjust for those generational changes?
Yeah, that's a good question. One of the things that I have as a little bit of a starter is I'm not much for the conversation about who uses the internet anymore. All of those generations that you just mentioned, everyone touches you online.
Yeah.
The idea that somebody's going to apply to your school without touching you online, it just doesn't happen.
Never happens.
Never happens. You could get referred by your best friend who said, this school is the best thing to ever happen to me and my family. They're still pulling out their phone. They're still looking you up, doing some research on their own before they book a tour or they get to your school. So generally,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, generationally, it starts with me. It starts with everyone's on the internet. And then Google Analytics has terrific demographic data. So the age, and if you're listening to this, and a quick check that you can actually do is go into your Google Analytics account, see if your demographics is turned on. Because a lot of schools that I meet just haven't turned it on. It's literally a click of a button.
Really?
And then we can start, and we can start breaking down. It's not a guessing game, age, gender, location. Google knows a lot about you. And that information is in Google Analytics.
Yeah, they know a lot about you. Yeah. Not all of that is good, but they know a lot about you. It's great for marketing. How
just
do you
better targeting? I would say just better targeting.
How do you integrate then the social media or online advertising with the website, which the two have to work together? If you're going to put out an ad and drive them to the website, I mean, we could have 3 podcasts on websites, but how do you view that integration, that symbiosis between your online ads and your website?
Yes. Websites could be our next podcast. For today's conversation, the biggest takeaway is your website has a very specific job to do. My website is good or bad. There's a number for that, and it's your conversion percentage. So when we're advertising in social, we're engaging in social, or we're running ads in the display network, Google Ads, whatever it may be, we're trying to drive the right audiences to our site. Once advertising has accomplished
the right audiences.
The right audiences.
Yeah, I don't want that point to go by. That's a great point. You're looking for the right audiences. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Absolutely. It'll be in the data. If it's the wrong audience, you're never going to find success. And the data will be very plain and obvious to everybody involved. You're advertising to the wrong people. If we get the right audience to the site, the website's job is to get them to do what we want them to do. Getting back to those conversion points, And for schools, it is important too. This is a little technical, but this is high-end digital advertising these days, is understanding our micro conversions on our website versus macro conversions. So your website has a job to do, get people to convert. Measuring that is actually measured by your conversion percentage. That number is your website's job. Good or bad is how good is your conversion percentage. And if you're working on your website, very often you should be working on it, testing, adding content to try to increase your conversion percentage. High-end digital advertising for schools these days, a micro conversion on the way to the macro is so important. So a macro conversion is somebody filling out an online application. Okay, it's the end of the road. It's our moneymaker. We know it's what we want people to do. But our customer journey is long and it's well researched. So if we can ask you to do something small, a micro conversion, like giving us your email address in exchange for a lookbook, as you mentioned earlier, those type of micro conversions on our way to macro are very, very important. Now that's high-end digital advertising these days, but our website's job is to convert audiences. And if we wanted to do a better job understanding our micro versus macro conversions, is a way that we can get there. It's a way that we can increase conversion.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, especially considering that we were talking about the journey that they take during their engagement. And it seems to me that those micro conversions will, if done properly, will lead to the macro conversion if it's a good fit. So do you build in those micro conversions along the way to try to lead them through the process?
You certainly should be. You should be thinking about it when you're building your websites. You should certainly be thinking about it when you're planning your advertising. It is kind of the same point that I made earlier, that first time somebody ever touches your brand or your school, asking them to apply now is probably the wrong thing to ask them. So planning for a micro conversion, like a way to get an email address, or even taking the right behaviors, it actually allows us to advertise to you differently, right? If you give us an email address, now we have that holy space of the inbox in our tactic mix, right? And we're going to be a lot more successful if we're in that inbox. I can promise you that. We can start serving ads differently based on a micro conversion, even if it's somebody who's looked into athletics versus academics. Going back to that, we can serve you an athletics or an academics ad based on your behavior or based on a micro conversion that you took on the site.
Just as a matter of mechanics, you've got someone who has touched your school multiple times, maybe gone through a micro conversion, not yet macro conversion. They've called, they've done this, they've done. How is all that brought together so that you're able to look at one individual family, understand the journey they're on, and react to their journey?
I get that question a lot. There's a lot of schools, a lot of HubSpotters out there that have, used HubSpot, and I've seen a lot of schools move away from HubSpot.
It can be expensive, some people feel.
It can be expensive. It's great at that one-to-one look. What it actually doesn't do that great of a job of is getting us higher up than that, is looking at, the what we call the converted journey, or it's a segment in Google Analytics. You can kind of get higher up and look at more of a bulk of conversions in the path they took to convert. Now, an important part of your question there, though, is the difference between marketing qualified lead and a sales qualified lead. So marketing works really hard. We're going to have multiple touch points on the way to you filling out inquiry form. Here's a great example of a marketing qualified lead. From there, we're kind of starting a different funnel. That's our sales qualified lead. So this is, you've inquired and I need to get you to enrollment. I need that finished application filled out online. And email, automated email, every time that we can touch that family via email, we're getting more and more data. We're getting another data point every time we get in their inbox, every time we get an open, every time we get them back to the site. We can ask them to do different things. We can encourage those human touch points back to admissions without our admissions people having to pick up the phone again, or a prompt to get them to pick up the phone. So once we're into that second funnel, that sales qualified lead funnel, we need to be using email to collect different data points, and then we'll identify gaps, we'll identify what's working and what's not through our email data.
And obviously for every family, that's going to be a different journey. So having that data is critical to understanding the Smith family versus the Jones family, and understanding where they are in their journey and what is important to them. Like you were talking about sports or science or language or whatever it is.
Especially if a family is applying to multiple schools, if you've gotten them to inquire or they've had a tour and you don't have that application filled out yet, you've got to try some different things early on to understand what types of content or what types of actions are going to motivate somebody to finish that application. So is it academics? Is it athletics? Is it financial aid? Is it scholarship? You've got to test some different things in that email funnel to see what's working and what's not as well.
We're almost out of time, but one last question. Every school community is unique. When we work directly with schools, I work with schools from Canada to Florida to the Midwest. The communities are very unique in how the community interacts and how they interact with the schools. So how does the type of community that you're working with affect the data you collect, if at all, and how you end up advertising to them, how you end up trying to reach them and get them to go through this process to the macro conversion?
If you would have asked this question earlier, Rob, I wouldn't have come off as such an analytics geek, which I'm very guilty of coming off as. Because
well, here's the question: are you an analytics geek?
I'm a little bit of an analytics geek.
Okay, there we are.
I do. I do side projects finding out baselines for conversion percentages. So I'm definitely an analytics geek. But the most important thing in advertising is what we're advertising. It's not the channel. It's not the tactic. It's not Google Ads versus Facebook. It's what are we advertising and who are we advertising to? Every school is different, and the most successful schools that we work with are well defined at the brand level, so that when we get to market, we are advertising for the right fit families against our competition in an effective way, and we are putting out the true strengths of that school into the marketplace. That type of positioning is the difference between winning and losing in the marketplace, especially when competition's higher. And it's got to start at the brand level, and then it has to be represented well in the creative. Anybody in digital who doesn't talk about brand and doesn't talk about creative will lose the fight against somebody who understands the importance of brand and brand positioning. I can tell you, when we work with a school, if we're not having great success, it's usually not the advertising, it's what we're advertising. We've got to go back, look at that positioning, make sure that we're getting the right messaging out in that marketplace, positioned the right way.
Well, those of you who have listened to other podcasts, you knew I would get it around to brand sooner or later, although luckily I had Kevin who brought it up.
As we should.
It has to start with your brand. If your brand is not well defined, I mean, I've got bunches of podcasts, lots of blogs we've written about brand. It starts and ends with brand. Having a clear, concise, compelling way to describe what makes your school community unique, and, as Kevin was saying, the things that differentiate you from your competitors. Even in the year 2021, there are still lots of schools that have not clearly identified their brand, that don't have, most importantly, the language necessary to describe that brand. And that language is what makes you, Kevin, your job viable, how you're able to do it. The schools have to have a great brand. And now Kevin is talking about data, talking about conversions, and where he ends up is brand. And it's it. I mean, what happens if you, Kevin, go to a school who wants to work with you and they don't have a clearly defined brand? I mean, you've got to start there.
It's got to be the starting point. Yes, I know what a big believer you are in this, Rob, and this is the analytics geek backing that point. It has to start at the brand level. If you're listening to this and you've been struggling with Facebook advertising for 4 years, Facebook advertising isn't the problem. Facebook advertising works. It's a tremendous targeting device. Your problem, if you've been struggling with it for 4 years, is what you're putting into Facebook advertising. It's, are you messaging correctly? Are you well positioned at the brand level? And if you're not, you've got to go back and you've got to fix that. And then you can have success when you go to market. Like anything else in life, right? If you're not built solidly from your foundation, as you start to go out there, as you start to try to grow, you're going to fall down if the foundation's not strong. And that brand is that foundational pillar for our schools.
And if developed properly, the brand is what's important to your existing families and your prospective families. That's what they're looking for. If your brand is not compelling to a family, they're probably not right fit. That's okay. When we used to do brand development, we used to tell schools, once your brand is launched and has taken root, what you may find is that your inquiries are down and your applications are up.
Oh, yeah.
Because your brand kind of helps people self-select out if your school isn't right for them, which is okay. And I love the fact that you're saying brand is the root of all of this. Because if you're looking for data, that's great. But the data is produced by the ads. The ads are supporting your brand. So that's great. That's really good. Kevin, this was a very quick 40-some minutes. I really appreciate it. Really great information. And I really like that this is the kind of information that we know schools struggle to do in-house. Some schools are better than others, but a lot of schools struggle to have data-driven decisions. So you guys are doing a great job, and I appreciate you sharing what you got with us.
I appreciate you having me. We made the decision to really focus on independent and private schools a few years ago, and a big part of it is this community. That you're a big part of, Rob. It's good people at the end of the day. We're doing a good thing, trying to help schools grow, trying to get students the type of education that the schools that we work with can produce. I really appreciate being part of this because it's being part of this community that we really respect and we really enjoy being a part of.
Yeah, it is a great community. The reason I've been doing this for 30 years is because I love the school community. I love the people who work there. Beyond the fact that I'm an independent school grad, and so is Liza, my wife, and my kids. And believe it or not, my father went to an independent school back in the 40s. So
right.
Independent private schools are important to this world. And you're doing great work to help them be a little more scientific with the way they go about it, which is great. If you have that kind of hard data available, wow, that just makes your job so much easier. So excellent work, and thank you for being on the podcast. I really do appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate you.
Thanks for listening. For more brilliant ideas and brain food for your school's Marcom, subscribe to InspirED Sparkcast on iTunes. Visit InspiredSM.com and sign up for our newsletter. We make your job easier.